The clock in the square struck 11 in the morning, with a low, slow sound resonating in the chest of whoever was there. The sun filtered lazily through the leaves of the mango trees, drawing warm, golden spots on the old stone floor. There was the sweet smell of garden flowers mixed with the aroma of popcorn from a cart rolling along the sidewalk, a smell that evoked childhood and carefree afternoons, contrasting painfully with the scene in front of Leandro Salazar. Leaning back on a hand-carved bench, Leandro watched the city go by without enthusiasm. His impeccable suit stood out from the environment. It highlighted it, but didn't ennoble it. People hurried past, arm in arm with their own problems, but none of them seemed as big as Leandro's. Next to him, Isabella, his 9-year-old daughter, remained motionless in her wheelchair. She was wearing a white dress with small blue flowers on it. Her slippers dangled, almost falling off her fragile feet, and her fingers played nervously with the hem of her dress. The silence between father and daughter was heavy, filled only by the sounds of the city, the birds flying low, the creaking of the benches, the distant voices of children running on the other side of the fountain. Since the accident, that bench in the square had become an obligatory break in their routine, almost a ritual of suffering camouflaged as an attempt at normality. Leandro, a man used to deciding everything, felt powerless. The contrast was even more cruel when he looked at Isabella, who gazed at the central fountain with empty eyes, as if she were searching for a life that had been taken from her. A flock of pigeons crossed the square, drawing smiles from some of the children, and bringing to the scene a thin boy with stained clothes and bare feet. His hair was the colour of freshly fallen chestnuts, and his lively, almost restless eyes scanned everything quickly. He carried a faded backpack on his back and hunched his shoulders with a certain rebelliousness. He approached them as if he already knew them, his face open in a debauched and childish smile at the same time. He stopped in front of Isabella's chair, ignoring the polished bronze stripes of the seat occupied by Leandro. "I can make her walk again, you know," he said in a clear, assured voice, as if promising something simple, like finding a lost ball. Leandro immediately adopted the posture of someone who doesn't have time for jokes, frowned, and looked the boy up and down, trying to assess whether this was some kind of trick, some joking charlatanry, or something from the street. His dry tone revealed impatience. "What did you say, boy?" The boy, Tomas, didn't back down. He swung his backpack on his back and laughed, taking advantage of the incredulous silence to get even closer to Isabella. "I said I'll make her walk again. Just trust me, sir." Isabella turned her face slowly, as if she didn't know if this was for her. Her eyes sparkled, but soon returned to their usual emptiness, before sliding over to her father, looking for instruction in his gaze. She opened her mouth but said nothing, just swallowed, surprised and frightened at being the target of such an impossible promise. Leandro took a deep breath, clicked his fingers on his knee, and arched an eyebrow. "Is this some kind of sick joke? Do you know what you're saying?" Tomas just smiled. He placed a stone on his foot with his big toe, then stared at Isabella, ignoring Leandro as if he wasn't worthy of an answer. "I always know what I'm saying. You just have to believe it." The wind blew harder, causing dry leaves to swirl around, the three of them. A woman stopped ahead to look at the group, but soon went on her way, perhaps accustomed to the strangeness of country squares. Leandro, overcome by a mixture of anger and sadness, stood up slowly, putting himself between Tomas and his daughter. "Go play somewhere else, kid. You don't say things like that to a child." Tomas didn't move. He looked at Isabella, and this time he spoke only to her. "If you want, meet me here tomorrow. I can show you how to walk again, I swear." Isabella pulled, the fabric of her dress even tighter, her eyes watering as they shone. A breath of hope, strange and shy, crept into her pale face. Leandro wiped the sweat from his brow, annoyed and upset. The smell of popcorn, once sweet, was now nauseating. The sound of the birds seemed like an affront. Tomas walked away the same way he arrived, lightly, with steps that barely made a sound, as if he knew invisible shortcuts on the ground. The distant sound of his whistle still echoed, as Leandro stared at his daughter, and saw, for the first time in months, a spark of life in her eyes. The morning wind seemed to have increased, bringing with it a chill that clung to the shadows of the surrounding trees. The noise of the central fountain became almost a whisper, blending in with the silent war between Leandro and Tomas. The boy was not at all intimidated by the hard stare of the well-dressed man. Isabella, in the middle of the two, clung to the side of the chair, her eyes sometimes jumping from her father's tense expression to Thomas's curious face. There was, however, a new sparkle in the girl's eyes, expectation sprouting like a flower, bud in dry soil. Leandro broke the silence, clicking his tongue. His voice was low but sharp, as if each word required effort. For a moment, he looked at his own shadow stretched out on the stone floor, trying to find some implacable strength. "There, what exactly do you think you can do? Don't come up with tricks or false promises now. This isn't a game, kid." Tomas didn't look away. He stood firm, hands flat on his knees. He took a deep breath, watching the light dancing on the leaves of the trees above. "It's no trick. I know what I'm doing. But it only works if she wants it to, if she believes in it." He looked straight at Isabella as he said this. "I sensed that you believed me, didn't I?" Isabella hesitated. Her voice sounded delicate, as if she wanted to float above the uncomfortable situation. I want to try." "Don't you think I should try?" "Dad?" Her fingers gripped the chair tighter, and the words came out mixed with hope and fear. Leandro clenched his fists, something almost invisible hardening his jaw. He wiped his hand across his forehead, sweat showing, even in the cold wind. "Try what? There's no doctor, no miracle, nothing. I don't know who you are, kid. It could be dangerous." His gaze wandered between Tomas and Isabella, lost. He turned to his daughter, his voice less sharp, tinged with concern. "Daughter, this boy is not a doctor. You can't promise such things." Tomas looked down at his feet and rubbed a finger on the floor. When he looked at Leandro again, there was a glint of defiance. "No, I'm not a doctor. I just want to help." Sometimes that's how it works. Someone helps without being a doctor, without a degree. If you don't want to, fine, but if you want to, I can do it. The silence lengthened. A bicycle sped past, creaking. Isabella bit her lip and looked at her father once more. Her eyes pleaded, "Daddy, please." It was as if the only place where hope could grow was right there, right then. Leandro snorted, finally allowing himself to let his guard down a little. He nodded, but the firmness was gone from his eyes. He wanted to protect Isabella, but he was tired of watching her die, little by little, fading away month by month. He sighed deeply, giving in more than he would have liked. "How much time do you need?" Tomas raised his head, as if he suddenly felt he was being taken seriously, although he didn't smile. 1 hour. I only need an hour, no more. If she doesn't want to continue after that, I'll never speak again. Leandro gritted his teeth, feeling disconnected anger at himself, at the other person, and at the world. He crossed his arms and looked away, trying to pull himself together. Next to him, Isabella gripped the back of the chair, and for the first time lifted her face completely. A disguised tear was coming down, but a shy smile was forming at the corner of her mouth. "It's okay," he said, his voice almost hoarse. "You have an hour, but I'll stay close by, listening and watching everything. If I think there's a risk, we'll leave." Tomas just nodded, unperturbed. He took some old string out of his pocket and wrapped it around his fingers, distracted. He looked at Isabella again, now with his own sparkle in his eyes, as if he was keeping an important secret from just the two of them. "You'll see, I promise." Isabella smiled shyly, and a lock of hair running down her face seemed to take on a more golden hue for a moment. A thrush sang in the trees, breaking the silence that hung like mist. Leandro, without realizing it, uncrossed his arms and relaxed his shoulders. The ritual of the square had just changed. Something unexpected had begun, in which hope and challenge shared space. It was as if time itself had slowed down because of that decision. The street vendor's popcorn flew in the breeze, spreading its aroma, and everything around seemed to be waiting. Tomas looked at Isabella, then at Leandro, and then knelt down, in front of her chair, looking ready for a private miracle. Leandro, with a divided soul, watched, sensing behind the mistrust an ancient feeling, the will to believe, and that's why he didn't interrupt when Thomas gently took Isabella's hands, indicating that the journey, improbable, crazy, improbable, had in a way already begun. The wind was still restless under the trees in the square, raising small clouds of dust and making fallen petals dance around Isabella's feet. Tomas, kneeling down in front of her, slowly took out a small black stone from the back of his shorts pocket. It was smooth, oval, almost shiny. It seemed to carry many years, perhaps centuries of history, even though it was just a simple stone in the eyes of anyone else. Leandro stood watching everything, his hands trembling in his jacket pockets. The heavy air of doubt hung around him, invisible but robust, as he kept his eyes fixed on Thomas. Every gesture from the boy was read as a threat, and every silence was an affront to the logic of his certainties. Thomas lifted the stone and placed it in Isabella's hands. The girl's small, cold hands received the object with all possible delicacy, almost like a rare gift, a shared secret. "Close your eyes," Thomas asked in a low voice, as if he could create a universe of their own inside that small wheel. Isabella hesitated, glancing at her father. Leandro's gaze was cautious and anxious, but there was no prohibition. Then she closed her eyes, clutching the stone tightly. Thomas guided her further. Now feel its weight. Imagine it's a seed sleeping in the very dark earth. Inside the stone, there is something that wants to wake up. Can you feel it?" She frowned, her imagination struggling to keep up with the strange boy's words. Isabella took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For a moment, the noise of the square disappeared. It was just the sound of her heart beating along with her careful breathing. Leandro took a step closer, unable to hold back his concern. "That's just a stone, Isabella. You don't have to force yourself," he said, trying to sound gentle, but his voice betrayed his unease. Thomas looked away quickly. He didn't answer the man, but the gesture was clear. Now was not the time for doubts. It was time to feel. Imagine, Isabella, that this stone came from a place where everything is very strong. Mountains, rivers, tall trees. Imagine that you too have strength. Try to think of it entering your arm, your whole body, all the way down to your feet. Thomas touched Isabella's ankles with his index finger, with an almost magical lightness, as if he were drawing an invisible path from the stone to the girl's feet. Isabella obeyed. Her calm face, damp with concentration, showed that she had immersed herself in that ritual beyond reason, guided by a silent hope. The same hope that made her fingers squeeze the smooth, cold object tighter. Leandro crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, took off his jacket and put it back on. His anxiety was as palpable as the smell of wet earth when the wind changed. He glanced at the people passing by, perhaps hoping that someone would laugh, that someone would intervene, that someone would tell the boy that this was absurd. But no one approached. It was just that small circle of suspended belief. One child in disbelief, another caught between pain and hope, and a third opening doors that no one else dared to pass through. "There's something hot," said Isabella suddenly, almost whispering, her eyes still closed. "Hot where?" Thomas leaned in, his voice low, his eyes shining with pure curiosity. "Here," she replied, pointing with her free hand to her knee, then her calf. Leandro came closer, his heart racing, as if he feared that any movement might break the spell of the moment. "Daughter, is everything all right? What are you feeling?" His voice came out almost hoarse, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Isabella remained silent for a moment, clutching the stone even tighter, her face scrunching up as she searched her own body for sensations that had been dormant for so long. I think it's like I'm waking up. It's weird, but good," she murmured, slowly opening her eyes and looking at Thomas with surprise and hesitant joy. Thomas smiled so openly, so genuinely, that for a second it was as if the whole square shone with him. "It's going well. Just keep going. Let's go again." He guided Isabella through a sequence of visualizations, sometimes asking her to imagine roots sprouting from her feet and burrowing into the earth, sometimes to feel a warm wave rising through her bones, waking up her dormant muscles. Each word came as an invitation for her to remember who she was before the accident, to trust in herself again, a strength that Leandro thought was no longer possible. A tear ran down Isabella's cheek, but it wasn't from pain. It was one of surprise, of rediscovery. "Daddy had moved, I felt it. A little," she said softly, with a hint of laughter breaking through the tears. Leandro knelt down in front of her, his eyes wide, his hands hanging in the air as if he were afraid of touching something sacred. He looked from his daughters, face to Tomas, then to the stone, then to her still feet. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, searching for some familiar logic to grasp. That's not possible," she muttered, but deep down she wished with all her heart that it was. Isabella dropped the stone into her lap and smiled at her father with a newfound hope. Thomas only stepped back a little, gathering the big string around his finger. The ritual was over for now, but the seed of doubt and faith had been sown. Leandro, lost between skepticism and miracle, saw all his old confidence slip through his fingers, and for the first time he didn't know if he really wanted to hold on to it. The night after the encounter in the square, Leandro's apartment was plunged into an unsettling silence. The clock on the wall chimed almost midnight, and he, unable to fall asleep, sat at the living room table, surrounded by piles of papers, notes, and the yellowish light of a lamp. The open laptop showed old files, newspaper archives, and company records. It was as if all the questions of his life were converging on that moment, weighing heavily on the shoulders of someone who had tried to keep everything under control for far too long. Typing in the boy's name, Tomas Oliveira, he found an almost forgotten article on a local news forum dating back 9 years. The headline was cold: "Family killed in accident at entrance to town. Baby survives." The couple's name echoed low in his mind: Luciana and Andre Oliveira. Photos accompanied the news: a crumpled car, an intact car seat among the wreckage. Tomas's face, still a baby, stood out in the photo. Big, frightened eyes, an expression that still seemed to ask for answers years later. Leandro felt a deep tightening in his chest, as if the air in the room had suddenly diminished. The driver's name, Roberto Vasconcelos, his employee, the accident. Everything came back with painful clarity. Suddenly, images from the past flashed through his mind like blades. Quick flashes: him in the office, receiving the call about the accident. The livid face of the lawyer next to him, explaining what had to be done to preserve the company's image, the compensation papers, the orders to resolve everything discreetly. The guilty visit to the hospital without ever identifying himself. Leandro recalled the decision, the signed check, the short press release, the silence bought. "They don't have anyone else," the lawyer recited, as if that justified the rush to finish the matter. The flashback grew inside him like a storm. The first time he saw Tomas on the news, the child rescued from the wreckage, who would never appear again in any conversation, faded into the system. An orphan boy that he, Leandro, never tried to find out where he ended up. But the boy's face, that of his parents, now flashed into his memory, blending with the image of Tomas in the square, so determined, so alone. Leandro's stomach churned. He immediately searched the company archives for the surname Oliveira, a confirmation of everything he already sensed. The date matched: July 14th, the same week his daughter was born, the same week as the reckoning. He felt sweat pouring down his face, even in the cold of the night. He ran his hands over his face, trying unsuccessfully to expel the guilt that had been ingrained there for years. The details of the accident came back to her: the rain, Roberto's haste, the urgent phone call he'd answered at the wheel, a silly detail, a human error turned into a tragedy by a choice that he, Leandro, had made a point of burying under layers of justifications. He reread the excerpt from the newspaper. The baby was sent to a shelter. No one from the family showed up. He wondered who had looked after him since then and how he had grown up. Now he knew. Tomas had survived, grown up on his own. And for some reason, fate, chance, or divine justice, he had stumbled into the Salazar family's life. The weight of the irony almost suffocated him. Slowly, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember for the first time the terrified face he had seen in the hospital, a memory avoided year after year, kept as a shameful secret. He felt as if he were looking into a cracked mirror. On one side himself, the man who had covered up someone else's pain. On the other, that big-eyed boy who was now approaching his daughter. It was impossible not to see, in his encounter with Tomas, the invisible hand of the past demanding a reckoning. The world seemed to have calmed down outside, but inside the apartment, everything was spinning. He got up from his chair and went to Isabella's room. She was sleeping with her arm wrapped around a pillow, her expression tranquil. Leandro leaned on the doorframe, feeling the double weight of responsibility. What kind of man am I? He thought. What have I done for them? What have I done to myself? When he returned to the living room, he took the printed copy of Tomas's baby, picture in his hands. The same eyes, the same one he was looking at now, years later, in the square. He felt his throat close up. A breath of warmth and shame rose to his face. That night, the image of the boy came to inhabit his thoughts, intertwining pain, remorse, and a fragile hope of redemption. And Leandro knew. When he looked at Tomas again, he wouldn't just see the child who could help Isabella. He would see, above all, the child he himself had failed to protect. He would look at Tomas with a mixture of humility, regret, and a timid beginning of compassion, finally understanding that the past never stays buried. It always comes back to demand the truth. The lobby of the old hospital still smelled of ether and waxed wood, mixing past and present in the narrow corridors. Leandro walked hesitantly beside Tomas, who held tightly to his faded backpack. They crossed doors and stairs to a small room, where Amilcar, a doctor with firm gestures and a watchful eye, was writing on a prescription pad. The man looked up when they entered, immediately recognizing Tomas, but frowned when he saw Leandro. There was a delicate tension in the air, as if everything could fall apart at any touch. Amilcar, with grey hair and hands marked by time and work, stood up slowly and got straight to the point, without affection or reproach. Why did you bring him here? Leandro hesitated. He had been thinking a lot over the last few nights about his own guilt, about the strange connection with Tomas, about the unlikely hope that was blossoming in his daughter. Now, in front of the doctor who had apparently saved Thomas years ago, he felt small. I need to understand what really happened, he confessed, looking sideways at the boy. The doctor turned to Tomas, who nodded silently, giving permission to tell. There's no mystery, Leandro, Amilcar began, his tone objective. When Tomas arrived here, he was even younger than Isabella. Everything said I wouldn't walk. But he wanted it so much, he threw stones at the physiotherapy, he cried, and he made an effort when no one else expected anything. We found a way to bring together medicine and hope. The body responds to the will, but it's not a miracle." Leandro listened in silence, fighting against his own prejudices. I wanted to question, to doubt, but it was his daughter who had smiled for the first time in months, and that boy, an orphan whom luck had brought back to his path, was the bridge between doubts and a future that was still possible. As they were talking, a woman burst into the room, the hospital manager in a white coat and with a stern expression. Donna Rosangela was known for her strictness, especially with any treatment outside of the protocols. "We do not tolerate unapproved practices here," he interrupted, looking fixedly at Tomas. "If you continue to mix your tricks with patients, we will be forced to prevent you from entering these premises again. It can cause irreparable damage." Tomas lowered his head for a moment, but then raised it again, serene, without losing the sweetness in his gaze. "This has nothing to do with money. It's hope, that's all," he replied, his voice calm, without retaliation. Leandro felt the impact of those words. The boy had not defended his technique, had not claimed to have power, nor had he asked for recognition. He was simply offering what he had received in return, the chance to believe. Rosangela, listening, shook her head in denial. "Hope is responsibility. We cannot let children take risks based on rituals and faith. Any effects are temporary coincidences." The mood turned sour. Amilcar stood next to Tomas, arms crossed, face closed. "Sometimes what saves is not just the medicine, doctor. I saw this boy get up. I saw it because I wanted it more than anyone else. And now I see that he gives it to other people for free. What's your problem with that?" Rosangela, irritated, insisted. "The hospital cannot be associated with quackery. Get that into your head." Leandro quickly understood the risk. If the administration found out about Tomas's help to Isabella, and if there was any significant improvement, that could bring consequences, complaints, perhaps even Amilcar's dismissal. He felt the old instinct of self-preservation kick in. Her daughter's face, however, came to her mind, along with the boy's suppressed cries in the hospital years before. It was all about courage, choice, and responsibility. Rosangela took a step forward, facing Leandro. "You are the father. You can't allow a child to play with your suffering. Do you really want your daughter to be a guinea pig for empty hopes?" Leandro felt the words hit him deep, like stones thrown on purpose. He thought of the endless hours in hospitals, the promises of famous doctors, all frustrated. He thought about Isabella's shy joy, rekindled by something simple that science couldn't explain properly. He remembered his own cowardice years ago, in hiding the truth behind contracts and checks. Suddenly, he realized that protecting her might not mean taking her away from Tomas, but rather allowing some risk in the name of what was being reborn inside her. The silence was broken by Tomas, who still held his stone in his pocket like a talisman. "I just want her to feel hope again. I want people to never stop trying. If you don't want to, I'll stop. But I don't want anything more than that." Leandro felt the weight of the choices, the doubt hammering between reason and feeling. If he protected Tomas, he would face criticism, disapproving looks, and the risk of lawsuits. If he backed down, he would not only lose his daughter's trust, but also the chance to make amends, even if only in part, for the mistakes of the past. He took a deep breath, looking at Rosangela, then at Amilcar, and finally at Tomas. The decision seemed impossible, but something inside him finally gave in. "Doctor," he said, his voice firm, "my daughter is my life. If she gets hurt, I suffer. But for the first time in years, I saw hope in her eyes. I will not deprive you of that because of my fears. If I have to take that risk, I will, and I want Tomas to continue. I'll protect him if necessary." Amilcar smiled discreetly, a proud gleam in his eyes. Rosangela, incredulous, finally grumbled, "The responsibility is now all yours, Mr. Salazar. I hope you know what you're doing." She left, leaving the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Leandro sat down exhausted, but he felt something different. It was the strange peace of someone who finally chooses with their own heart, even in the face of fear. Tomas smiled his usual shy smile, the same smile that years before had performed a silent miracle. There, between worn walls and hard looks, an unlikely alliance was born. Guilt and redemption, past and future, united by that which no medical authority could prescribe. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a new hope. The cold of that morning seemed to penetrate the bones, even inside the stuffy room of the small apartment. Tomas, sitting next to Isabella in the wheelchair, organized stones, coloured string, and leaves he had brought from the square, trying to transform everything into small exercises of hope. Isabella's eyes, more lively since the beginning of the treatment, followed each movement with anxiety, while Leandro watched from a corner, torn between faith and doubt. Just before lunch, at the moment when Tomas instructed Isabella to try to lift her right foot once more, something unexpected happened. A sharp crack echoed through the room. Isabella blinked and felt a sharp sting, and her expression immediately changed. Her face contorted with pain. Tears sprang from her eyes before she could hold them back. She let out a muffled scream, unable to continue. Tomas stood there in shock, his gaze fixed on the girl. Leandro immediately went to his daughter, alarmed. "What happened?" Leandro held Isabella in his arms, distressed. "Does it hurt? Where, Isa?" Isabella could only stammer with difficulty about the location of the pain. "My ankle. It hurts a lot." The day, which had begun shining with hope, fell apart in an instant. Leandro felt his anger grow, along with an old, bitter fear. His desire to see his daughter happy had put her at risk again. The mood grew heavy. Tomas retreated to the corner of the room, his gaze fixed on the floor. He felt his chest tighten with guilt. The words of Rosangela, the hospital manager, echoed in his head. It could cause irreparable damage. For a moment, it was as if all the adult's suspicions made sense. He was nothing more than a foolish boy who played with other people's things. Amilcar, who had been watching the exercise, calmly approached, examining Isabella's ankle. "It doesn't seem serious, Leandro, but she needs to rest. Maybe she pushed too hard." Tomas shook his head, his eyes full of tears, avoiding looking the doctor or Leandro in the eye. No one in the room knew, at that moment, that for him, Isabella's pain was much more than a failure. It was guilt reborn from the rubble of his own history. Flashbacks invaded his mind with brutal force. The car was driving on the wet road, the rain beating on the windows. His parents were screaming, the lights of another vehicle coming too fast. Thomas, small and unable to understand why they were, running, feels the impact, the sensation of being thrown away. The sound of metal, glass, screams that turn to silence, and then only pain. In his legs, his entire body, and in the eyes of someone who loses everything at once. The sirens, the rain coming through the broken window. Amilcar's face emerging tender between the shreds of conscience. Thomas was taken to the hospital, at first without hope. He remembers the forest of pipes, the cold of the plaster, the endless nights thinking about his parents, and the emptiness. He remembers, above all, Amilcar trying to convince him that he could survive. The effort to move one finger, then another. Weeks of physical therapy mixed with the furious desire. Not to be forgotten. Now, seeing Isabella cry in pain, everything came back. The fear of making someone else suffer, of being a disaster himself. He breathed with difficulty, wanting to disappear. Leandro, seeing the boy's paleness, approached. "Thomas, listen. This is not your fault. Sometimes when we want something so much, we don't realize how much we are trying. I shouldn't have let you—" His voice faltered, overcome with fear. "Aren't we playing with the impossible? We just want her to smile again. But what if it's not safe?" Doubt weighed heavily on everyone. Amilcar looked at the papers on the table, his expression tired. He knew well the weight of expectations and the danger of frustrated hopes. Thomas, still leaning against the wall, finally looked up at Leandro, his eyes filled with tears. "I shouldn't have insisted," he murmured. "I'm not a doctor. I just wanted her not to give up, like they did to me." He stopped, swallowing hard. "But maybe I'm just hurting her in another way." The silence closed in heavily, unable to be broken easily. Between them hung uncertainty, to abandon everything now, before something worse happened, or to trust, once again, that the impossible could happen, even at the cost of failures, falls, and pain. Isabella, despite the pain, pulled Thomas's arm, resting her head on his shoulder. "I don't want it to stop," she whispered, her voice choked. "If I hurt, I'll stop. But don't stop, Thomas, please." Leandro stood still, feeling like an old sailor watching the rough sea, not knowing if he should move forward again. He weighed the responsibility of a father against the voice of his own guilt, from years of unredeemed guilt. Fear of failing, of taking risks, of admitting his mission now was to protect, but also to allow something unknown to flourish. Even amid failures, finally, while the room remained still, Leandro knelt before the two, speaking softly but firmly, as if each word needed to be engraved in time. "Let's keep going. Sometimes making mistakes is just part of the journey." Thomas just nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, while Amilcar sighed and Isabella smiled shyly, her face mixed with pain and hope. Failure became part of hope, and the next step, even if uncertain, was also a silent rebirth. In the late afternoon, the sky in the square was beginning to take on rusty and violet hues. Isabella, now more confident, slowly moved her hands, in her lap, weighted down by a light blanket. Thomas was at her side, organizing small objects, stones, leaves, and string, while explaining how each one was part of a game of strength and patience. Leandro stood watching from behind a bench, his arms crossed, attentive to every gesture of Tomás, whose dedication to Isabella was so genuine that it was beginning to break down old resistances. Suddenly, a municipal guard approached decisively. His blue uniform contrasted with the dust on his shoes, and the severity of his expression made everyone around him feel the air grow more charged. He stopped in front of Tomás, looking at him as if he already knew and disapproved of the boy. "This is the third time I've seen you bothering people in this square. Come on, boy, this is no place for that. I already told you you can't do it." Tomás stood up quickly, putting his few belongings in his faded backpack, his face tense and surprised, as if he was used to being chased away, but never stopped feeling the pain of rejection. Isabella immediately grabbed his arm, desperate. "Please, don't," he began, his voice trembling. The guard turned to Leandro, waiting for approval to take the boy away and restore order. What he didn't expect was the man's reaction. Leandro walked towards them, his chest heavy with memories and decisions. "I don't see anyone being bothered, guard. This boy is helping my daughter. He's not asking for money, nor is he harming anyone." The guard grumbled, already used to getting rid of anyone who seemed out of place. But he found the authoritative tone strange. "Sir, parents like you need to protect your children from people who show up here with stories and stones. You can't trust them. You understand, don't you?" Tomás shrank back once more, pulling his backpack to his chest. Leandro felt an urgent need to protect the boy, perhaps also because he recognized the abandonment in his eyes. He took a deep breath, remembering the past, his own mistake years ago, and took an unexpected action. "I understand perfectly," he replied, looking deep into the guard's eyes. "That's why I'm here. I won't allow anyone to touch his dignity. He's my responsibility now." As he said this, Leandro took an old keychain from his inside pocket, decorated with an engraving of a tree. It had been given to him by his father when he was young, with the promise that he would protect whatever was valuable. He ran his fingers over the object, feeling the cold metal. "Do you know what this is?" he asked the guard, holding up the keychain. "It's the key to the gate of my house. Today it represents trust, and I'm putting it in the hands of those who have the courage to take care of others, not just themselves." The guard hesitated, surprised to see such authority coming from a visibly wealthy man taking sides with that scrawny boy. He looked around, uncomfortable when he realized that some people were already noticing the scene. "If that's the case, sir, my obligation is to respect the decision of the person in charge. I'm just doing my job, you understand?" He replied sullenly, "But let me make it clear. The square has rules, and if something happens, you'll be held accountable." Leandro simply nodded, putting away the keychain. He turned to Tomás and Isabella, his expression open and sincere. Tomás, not knowing what to say, remained silent, but his eyes shone, a mixture of hope, fear, and gratitude. Leandro crouched down in front of them, his eyes still filled with tears as when he was a child. "Come with me. I want to show you my home, my family. You'll feel safe there, Tomás. I want you to keep helping Isabella. I want to learn from you too." Isabella looked at her father with a joy she hadn't felt in months. and Tomas could hardly believe the royal invitation. Then he felt Leandro place the tree keychain in his hand. The metal seemed to pulse with meaning. It was more than a key. It was permission to belong, to care. A symbol of transformation. Someone who had always been expelled was now being shown the doors to a new life. The guard was still watching, torn between duty and compassion, so Leandro looked directly at him in a gesture of silent collaboration. Let's do what's best for her together. We're a team now, aren't we, officer? The man, surprised by the call to collective responsibility, scratched the back of his neck and finally nodded. Yes, we are, sir. The important thing is that she has this, he replied, indicating Isabella. Hope. Tomas squeezed the keychain between his fingers, finally feeling the good weight of a shared responsibility. Isabella hugged the boy, and Leandro touched the officer's shoulder. In the heat of the afternoon that was turning into night, a new configuration was forming. Enemies, strangers, parents and children uniting to protect the hope that was blooming discreetly in the center of the old square. The heavy curtains of Leandro's mansion filtered the morning sun, creating golden streaks on the polished floor. It was Tomas's third day in that house, and despite Isabella's efforts to include him in her routine, a silent tension hung in the air. The employees moved differently, whispering in the hallways, casting quick, suspicious glances whenever Tomas passed by. The low voices, which at first were just murmurs, became slanted comments that ran from one room to another. In the kitchen, while Isabella tried a new exercise with Tomas, trying to feel the weight of a bean squeezed between her toes, Marta, the grey-haired housekeeper with a stern look, whispered on the phone to another employee, "That boy doesn't belong here. He smells like trouble. He messes with things he doesn't understand. I saw him yesterday. He was alone with the girl for almost an hour. Keep an eye on him. God knows what's going on in his head." That same afternoon, Leandro, as he crossed the hall, heard part of a muffled conversation coming from behind the office door. He stopped, any trace of patience fading. Reuben, the gardener, murmured, "They say he lived on the streets. Some people say the police are looking for a boy with the same features, involved in trouble. Do you trust them?" Despite the discomfort, Leandro tried to ignore it. His focus was on Isabella. His daughter's advances were undeniable, her laughter more frequent, her gaze less opaque. Still, the employee's discomfort reached its peak when Marta, tense, grabbed Leandro's arm the following night, almost dinner time, and led him to the kitchen. On the table, a simple brown envelope lay next to a glass. "Sir, we need to talk," Marta announced in a firm voice, looking directly at Leandro, with the other two employees in the background. "We found this near the boy's things. He's running away from something. Inside this envelope are clippings. Old news about the accident that killed his parents. Shelter documents. A sheet says that he fled the last place he was. He says he disappeared and that no one wanted to take responsibility. Do you understand the danger? What if he is cheating on his daughter? What if he hurts her or the house?" The silence became dense. Leandro now stared into Marta's aloof eyes. He felt Reuben staring at the back of his neck. He sensed the wait for the verdict. The mansion seemed smaller, threatened by the insecurity that always lurked when something or someone from outside crossed its gates. Tomas, standing at the entrance, had heard his name echo suspiciously. The familiar envelope caught his eyes like a ghost. The old secret, his time in the shelter, his escape after being beaten by another older boy, his fear of being rejected in the foster homes, was out in the open, exposed for all to see. Marta spoke more firmly with each passing moment. "Your choice, sir. Either we keep the house safe as always and ask the boy to leave, or we risk everything. The family's reputation, the little girl's safety. Think about Isabella. Think of what could happen," he concluded, and the final warning was a scathing whisper. "You are responsible for every step this boy takes in here." Isabella appeared at the door next to Tomas. She felt the full force of the accusation and looked in confusion from her friend's panicked expression to her father's closed face. Leandro, for a moment, didn't know what to say. The protective desire clashed violently with memories of her own past, of how hiding secrets and expelling different people only perpetuated suffering. Still, he hesitated. The image of Isabella, smiling shyly at the boy, flashed through his head, of their nighttime conversations, their small achievements. He also remembered protecting a culprit years ago, just so as not to tarnish the family name. And Isabella, in silence, held Tomas's hand tightly. "Sir, value what is yours. Don't take risks for someone you don't know." Leandro felt the morale, weight of the dilemma. Protect his daughter from risk by following the rules, or protect her from sadness by keeping hope alive, even in the face of fear. With a decisive movement, Leandro took the envelope, looked at Marta, then Tomas, and finally left the envelope on the table untouched. This house was built on fear, isolation, and lies. I will not reinforce walls that separate us from what gives us hope. Thomas stays. He is part of our family now. If anyone doesn't feel safe working here, they can come to me," he said, his voice full of authority. "But from today on, in this house, no one will be condemned for their past, only by your actions." Marta, wounded in her pride and security, opened her mouth, but Leandro remained firm. Isabella needs faith, not new walls. The silence stretched on, tense, while Isabella walked with effort, guided by Tomas, towards Leandro, hugging her father. Their faces were close together, and in Tomas's expression, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and persistent fear. Leandro added, looking at Marta and Reuben, "In our house, everyone has the right to start over. And if we start over together, no one will be able to break Isabella's trust." Tomas nodded robustly, and Isabella smiled, her eyes filled with tears, knowing that, at least there, she would be protected from the shadows of the past. The winter sun tinted the mansion's windows with soft golden hues, making the cold spacious, hallways a little less impersonal. In the last few weeks, Isabella had made remarkable progress. Her toes could now grip small stones, her ankle was moving, and one morning she was even able to support her weight on one leg for a few seconds. The employees watched discreetly. The buzz of suspicion gradually gave way to curiosity and surprise. Leandro spent more time at home, feeling the past and the present intertwining, restless in a blanket of old guilt and recent hopes. In the main room, next to the open window and the lit fireplace, Tomas was sitting next to Isabella, both sharing low laughter as they arranged figures made of stones and string on the central table. Isabella, with her bright eyes, seemed like another child, her sadness buried by the rediscovery of herself. Leandro watched the scene from a distance, proud, relieved, but also fearful of the next step. At the end of that afternoon, with the light already escaping through the curtains, Tomás approached Leandro, who was absent-mindedly leafing through an old book, more to calm his mind than to seek meaning in the pages. The boy hesitated, his body tense and his restless hands playing with the worn pocket of his coat. "I need to talk." Leandro looked at Tomás, noticing the seriousness contained in the boy's voice. He closed the book and felt the room freeze in silence. "Sit here, Thomas." The boy sat in the low armchair in front of Leandro. For a moment, only the crackling of the wood was heard. Tomás's breathing quickened. "You know that envelope with documents about me," he began, his voice breaking. "I kept everything because it's all I remember about my parents. They died because of an accident. I was just a baby. When I grew up, no one wanted to stay with me for long in the shelters. I moved from one place to another, trying not to disturb anyone. I learned to help, to take care of the weakest, because I knew what it was like to have no one. When I escaped from there, I promised myself that if someone ever trusted me, I would never leave that person alone. And then I met Isabella. She trusted me before she knew everything about me." Leandro listened motionless, his eyes already filled with tears, the weight of guilt slowly breaking down internal barriers. Tomás took a long string and a small black stone from his pocket, polished by hours of anxious handling. He smoothed the stone and looked at the man in front of him. "I did that when I was scared. Each knot in this string is a fear overcome. Every time I thought about giving up, I tied a knot to remember that I made it through. And the stone, it's too. Hold on tight when it seems like everything is going to fall apart." The emotions came thick and silent. Leandro was about to speak when the boy, with a determined look, offered the set to the man. "I wish you would have this now, because I don't feel alone anymore," Tomás said, extending the string with the stone attached to the end. The gesture was as intense as it was shy. There was silence throughout the house. The crackling of the fireplace seemed to echo the fragility of the scene. Leandro picked up the symbolic object with trembling hands, the stone firm and warm from the heat of Tomás's hands. The string marked with dozens of knots, tangled stories of pain and courage. Leandro's tears rolled down without resistance. His shoulders shook with the force of an emotion that had been bottled up for years. With each knot he felt, he remembered the choices he had made, the carelessness with the boy's past, and the emotional isolation he had imposed on the two of them. She cried softly, looking at Tomás with a mixture of regret and tenderness. In a genuine outburst, Leandro knelt in front of Tomás, dropping the book and holding the stone between his hands. He felt the string pulling at memories that were almost forgotten. He looked deep into the boy's frightened eyes and said, his voice choked but full of conviction, "You will never be alone again. I failed you unknowingly, abandoning you while I tried to protect myself and my family from the truth. But today I understand. Tomás, from this moment on, this house is your home, and you are my son," he said, breaking the words with a sob. "I promise to be the father you always wanted to have. This is my redemption, choosing to love even when it seems hard, even when the world expects me to close the doors. Thomas's eyes widened, shining with confusion and joy, fear and pure hope. Isabella, attracted by the murmurs and the almost sacred silence, approached and touched the boy's shoulder, smiling. They hugged Tomas and Isabella, pulling Leandro into a tight circle. 3 figures fused together in the warmth of the fireplace, between open tears and intense smiles. On the floor, between them, was the black stone tied to the string, an indelible symbol of the hope rescued and the family recreated. Outside, the last ray of afternoon sunlight timidly entered, warming the atmosphere, as if recognizing for the first time a true home within those walls. Winter was already starting to give way to brighter, milder days when Leandro, Isabella, and Tomas arrived at the city registry office. The old building with its tall doors and slightly frosted glass was in itself a symbol of passage, of lives that crossed paths, of stories that ended with a full stop or began with a new signature in pen. At reception, Leandro held Tomas's hand with protective firmness, while Isabella, sitting in her wheelchair, watched the movement with discreet anxiety. The waiting room carried the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, and the portraits of former employees seemed like silent spectators of new destinies. Leandro, in a dark suit and with attentive eyes, carried an envelope with all the papers needed for the adoption. For months, since the day of the hug and the promise made by the fireplace, he had prepared for that moment. He had listened to Tomas's stories, recounted his own faults, felt himself being reborn each day as he watched Isabella blossom and Tomas gradually lose the weight of loneliness. Tomas, wearing a blue shirt with small paint stains and freshly ironed dress pants, kept the string with the stone tied around his wrist like a bracelet. His gaze was a mixture of wonder and insecurity, the marks of someone who, for a long time, had only known shelters and half-open doors, distrusting permanence. When the clerk called them, they walked together down the long corridor. The registry office seemed like a solemn scene, where every step echoed small choices from the past. They sat in front of the clerk, who smiled softly, oblivious to everything. That moment meant beyond the formality of the paper. It was there, finally, that an old cycle would end, making room for what was to come. Leandro signed the first page with a slight tremor and immediately took Tomas's hand in his. "Are you ready to be my son, Thomas?" he asked, his voice firm and caring, beyond the bureaucracy. Thomas responded with a serious nod, a shy smile, and eyes shining moistly with emotion. "I always wanted to be part of a real family. Thank you, Dad." Isabella, observing the scene, showed an almost silent contentment. It was as if, in that moment, she understood that hope was not only in what could be recovered from the body, but in what could be built for the heart. When it was Tomas's turn to sign his new surname, he bit his lip, held the pen with both hands, and carefully drew Salazar next to his own name. In the end, everyone took a deep breath. Leandro hugged Tomas and Isabella. The clerk stamped each page with simple solemnity, sealing a new chapter of life for everyone there. As we left, the wind brought dry leaves along the sidewalk, as if blowing away the last dust from the past. Already at home that same afternoon, Isabella wanted to go to the garden. The sky, a warm blue, served as the backdrop for a delicate scene. Tomas, now officially Isabella's brother helped adjust her own sandals and arranged small stones to mark a path in the grass. Marta and Reuben watched from afar, less resistant than before, observing the new way of being and understanding the family within that house. Leandro squatted down in front of Isabella, held her hands, and with a voice trembling with pride said, "You will only go as far as you feel safe, daughter. There is no rush." Tomas stayed close, but in a gesture of trust, he didn't touch her again. It was time for Isabella to take her own steps. She looked down, feeling the damp grass beneath her feet. Her entire body was an axis of tension and desire, but something was pulsing stronger. She took a deep breath and looked to her father and her newly adopted brother for the courage she needed. Then slowly, supported only by her own strength and a spark of faith, she stood up. The first foot moved forward hesitantly, the second followed. It was a little more than half a step, but it was enough to make everyone hold their breath. Isabella's smile broke out, radiant. 2 more steps, this time without any support, until she reached a small stone on the path, the same black polished stone that Tomas had given her months ago. She bent down, picked up the symbolic object, closed her eyes, and felt the warmth emanating from it. When she opened them, she saw her brother and father smiling, laughing through tears. "I did it, Daddy." "You did it, my daughter." "And we did it together," Leandro replied, supporting her without hindering her freedom. At the end of the afternoon, everyone sat on the grass, expressing in silence and glances what words could not always achieve. The certainty that, even after great losses, it is possible to start over and create eternal bonds. The house, illuminated by the golden light of the beginning of a new cycle, seemed different, more open, more alive, more like a family. And there, in that improvised unit, bearing marks, scars, and precious little victories, everyone understood the true meaning of redemption. Because hope is not what is expected. Hope is what is built together, every day. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and activate the bell so you don't miss new stories that move and unite generations. Share it with someone who needs a hug of hope today. In the comments, tell us, what was the moment that made you believe most in the power of love and redemption? Together, we will transform stories into bridges of connection.